It was a blistering August afternoon, the kind where the sun practically scorches your skin even if you're standing in the shade. I had just finished my morning errands and was pulling into the driveway, looking forward to a peaceful day lounging by my pool with an iced tea in hand and maybe a podcast playing through my Bluetooth speaker. It was one of those days where everything seemed to align just right. My work emails were caught up, my house was clean, and most importantly, my dog Tyson, a big lovable Pitbull with more personality than most humans I know, had just come back from a long walk and was sprawled happily in the cool air of the living room. But as I stepped out of my car and glanced toward the backyard, something felt ... off. I couldn't quite place it at first. It was just a strange stillness, the kind that whispers that something isn't quite right, even if you can't put your finger on it. That's when I noticed the slight ripple in the surface of the pool, and a glint of something was that sunglasses. I squinted harder, moving past the fence and towards the gate leading to the backyard. That's when I saw her, a woman, mid to late 40s maybe, lounging casually on one of my pool floats like it was her own personal resort. She had a sun hat pulled low, a drink in hand, my drink, mind you, probably grabbed from the mini fridge I kept by the outdoor grill, and a Bluetooth speaker softly playing some kind of yacht rock playlist. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong backyard, or maybe I was hallucinating. But no, this was my patio furniture, my umbrella, and even my favorite blue towel, now wrapped around her waist like some kind of makeshift sarong. She hadn't noticed me yet, clearly too engrossed in whatever fantasy of upper-class leisure she was living in. Español, frozen for a moment, unsure if I should laugh, scream, or pull out my phone and start filming. But before I could make a decision, Tyson bounded outside through the doggy door, alerted, no doubt, by the subtle shift in my energy. He paused for a split second, his eyes locking on the stranger in our backyard. His ears perked, head tilted, tail slowly starting to wag. Tyson wasn't the kind of dog to bark or growl unless provoked. He was affectionate to a fault, but he was very territorial, especially when it came to his favorite hangout, the pool area. He gave me a look that almost seemed like he was asking, "Who the heck is this?" Still, she remained oblivious. Tyson began to trot toward the pool, not aggressively, just casually, like he always did when he wanted to cool off. The moment his paws hit the edge of the water, and he gave a joyful little leap, splashing loudly into the deep end. It finally caught her attention. She screamed loud, like movie theater. She dropped her drink into the pool, flailed to get off the float, and slipped, landing with a mighty splash of her own. Meanwhile, Tyson was just thrilled to have someone to swim with. His tail wagged furiously as he paddled closer to her, tongue lolling out in his signature goofy grin. The woman, completely thrown off, began shouting, get your dog," as if she was the one being violated. I could hardly contain myself at that point. I walked closer, leaned against the fence, and called out, "Excuse me, but who exactly are you, and why are you in my pool?" Her jaw dropped. I could see the gears turning in her brain, like she was trying to concoct a lie on the fly, something that would make her look less insane. "Oh, I thought this was in my friend's house. I must have made a wrong turn," she stammered. Her voice was shrill, her eyes still locked on Tyson, who was now circling her excitedly, assuming she wanted to play fetch. I couldn't believe the audacity. This wasn't just some innocent mistake. There was a gate code, a locked latch, a private property sign, and a clearly visible address plaque above the back fence. No way she accidentally ended up here. But before I could say any of that, she began splashing toward the edge of the pool, scrambling to climb out as Tyson tried to nudge a floating toy toward her. She screamed again, "Call off your dog," as if she hadn't been the one trespassing in the first place. At this point, I was torn between being furious and completely entertained. Tyson, bless his heart, still had no idea he was being accused of anything. To him, this was a rare treat, a surprise playdate in the water. But to her, it was the apocalypse. The image of this woman completely soaked, clutching her hat, one sandal missing, and trying to climb out of a pool she had no business being in will forever be burned into my memory. And Tyson, following her with loyal curiosity, as if saying, "Where are you going? We just started playing," made it all the more surreal. As she finally hauled herself out of the pool, water streaming down her arms and legs like she'd just been rescued from a shipwreck, I got a better look at her. Designer sunglasses knockoffs, probably. Her pink one-piece suit looked like it had seen better days, though she wore it like it was straight off a runway in Milan. She was still sputtering about Tyson, who now stood at the pool's edge wagging his tail and letting out a soft whine, clearly confused as to why his new pool buddy had abandoned him so quickly. "Your beast attacked me," she barked, jabbing a finger toward my dripping wet Pitbull, who gave her the most bewildered expression I've ever seen on a dog. "Beast," I repeated, crossing my arms. "Lady, he literally brought you a toy." That's when she took off her sunglasses and gave me the look, the one I've seen 1,000 times on social media, the one every cashier and barista dreads. I had no doubt in my mind now. I was face to face with a real-life Karen. She huffed, straightening up and pulling the towel tighter around her like a queen preparing to address her peasants. "Well, I need to speak to the homeowner immediately," she demanded, eyes darting around like I might summon someone from inside. Great, I replied with a smirk. You're looking at him. That clearly threw her off. She blinked rapidly, her brain clearly trying to compute how someone like me could afford a house with a private pool. The gears turned behind her. Tight expression. I could practically hear the judgments being made. My basketball shorts? The fact I was barefoot? The messy ponytail I'd tied my hair into after my errands? None of it fit the image she expected from the man of the house. Karen was recalculating. You own this house? She asked, incredulous. Yes, I said firmly. And I didn't invite you. So now would be a great time to explain how you ended up sunbathing on my float and drinking my lemonade. Instead of answering, she tried to pivot. Well, you should really keep your gate locked, she snapped. It was open, and I assumed it was community access. These homes all look the same. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer nerve. My gate had a padlock, a very visible one, which she had obviously bypassed somehow. I shook my head. There's a code lock. There's a sign. There's a camera. I pointed to the small black orb mounted above the back porch light. Her face paled. You recorded me, she gasped. That's illegal. I'll sue. I gave a dry laugh. Lady, you broke into my yard and used my private pool. I'm pretty sure you're the one with the lawsuit coming. She didn't like that answer. She started pacing, dripping water all over the patio, arms flailing like she was delivering a TED Talk to an imaginary audience of fellow entitled TRESPASSERS. Meanwhile, Tyson plopped down next to my lawn chair, watching the spectacle with interest, his tail thumping against the ground in slow rhythmic beats like a drum roll. I knelt beside him and gave him a scratch behind the ears. You did good, buddy, I murmured, and I swear he grinned. Karen wasn't finished. I'm calling the HOA, she suddenly announced, like it was her trump card. I raised an eyebrow. Go ahead, I said. I am the HOA president. Another pause, another blink. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, she went full damage control mode. Well, I guess it was just a misunderstanding, she began, voice suddenly syrupy sweet. You know how these things go. Honestly, you should take it as a compliment. Your yard is just so inviting. The whiplash almost gave me a headache. Inviting doesn't mean free for all, I said flatly. You still haven't told me who you are, or how you even knew this backyard existed. She looked down at the ground. I was walking by. Earlier this week, I saw the pool through the bushes. That confirmed it. She had been watching my property. A chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't just an annoying misunderstanding, it was calculated. Tyson must have sensed the change in my energy because he stood up and positioned himself in front of me, calm but alert. Karen's eyes flicked nervously to him. He's not going to attack, is he? She asked. Not unless you give him a reason, I replied coolly. She seemed to deflate a little, her facade of superiority beginning to crumble under the weight of her own foolishness. Look, she sighed, I just wanted to cool off. It's been a rough week. My AC's out, and the community pool is always full of kids. I figured no one would notice if I slipped in for a few minutes. I stared at her. There it was. The warped justification. In her mind, her comfort outweighed my right to privacy and safety. It wasn't even malice, it was sheer entitlement. I exhaled and shook my head. You need to leave now, before I decide to call the cops. Her eyes widened again. You wouldn't try me, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the camera roll. A single frame from the security cam feed showed her climbing my locked gate. Her mouth opened, closed. Then, silently, she turned and started walking toward the back gates, wet, one sandal missing, towel trailing behind like a sad little cape. Tyson walked beside her the whole way to the gate. Not growling, not barking, just making sure she left. I watched as she trudged toward the gate, dripping and defeated, clutching her damp towel like a flag of surrender. But I'd dealt with enough people like her in my life to know. Karens don't go down that easily. Just as she reached the gate, she stopped. She didn't open it. She turned around slowly, dramatically, like she had just remembered something crucial, some final line of defense in her mind that she hadn't used yet. You know, she said, voice suddenly calm but laced with venom. You should be careful how you treat your neighbors. Her eyes met mine in that forced, two-eyed smile that people wear when they're seething underneath. This kind of attitude won't go unnoticed in this community. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. Lady, the only thing that's going to get noticed is you breaking into my property and making a fool of yourself in front of my dog. She didn't respond to that, just stared at me, still dripping wet, her once fluffed sun hat, now drooping, on one side like it had given up the will to live. Fine, she muttered, finally pushing open the gate with a dramatic creak. But even as she walked off down the side path between my fence and the neighboring hedge, she kept glancing back, over her shoulder like she was expecting me to chase her down or beg her not to report me to some imaginary authority. Tyson sat at the edge of the deck, watching her disappear with his head tilted, like he couldn't quite figure out what breed of human that had just been. I walked over and gave him a pat on the head. Don't worry, buddy, I said. She's gone, ma. But I knew in my gut it wasn't over. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, just as I'd settled into my patio chair with a fresh glass of lemonade, one I'd poured myself. Thank you very much. The doorbell rang, not the chime on the gate. but the front doorbell, the one that no one ever used except delivery people and, apparently, people who wanted trouble. I stood up, stretched, and walked around the side of the house. Tyson padded along next to me, more curious than concerned. When I opened the door, I found myself staring at a man in a collared shirt and khaki shorts, holding a clipboard. He looked about as thrilled to be there as I was to see him. "Hi there," he began in that too nice tone that customer service workers use when they know something awkward is coming. "I'm Bill, from the Neighborhood Welcome Committee." I blinked. "The what?" "The Neighborhood Welcome Committee," he repeated. "We help maintain friendly relationships between neighbors, handle small disputes, that sort of thing." I narrowed my eyes. "Did someone send you here?" He gave a sheepish smile. "Well, I received a concern from a resident about a dog behaving aggressively and a possible altercation at this address." Tyson barked once, not loudly, just enough to make his presence known. Bill flinched. "That the dog?" "That's Tyson," I said. "The most aggressive thing he's done today is try to play fetch with a trespasser." Bill glanced down at his clipboard, flipping to a page that was clearly just a template form. And with this trespasser happened to be a woman, mid-40s, said she was confused about property boundaries? I sighed. "Yeah, that's one way to spin it. She climbed my locked gate, swam in my pool, used my stuff, and then screamed at my dog when he got confused about why there was a stranger on his turf." Bill exhaled and looked off to the side. "Look, I'll be honest. You're not the first person she's had a boundary confusion with. Last month she walked into someone's garage and used their elliptical." I blinked again. "You're kidding?" "I wish I were," he said, "but I still have to file a note on the visit. Procedure. Do you mind if I jot down your version of the events?" I let him in, gave him a rundown of the whole ordeal from beginning to end, while Tyson flopped beside us on the living room rug, completely unfazed. Bill was polite, understanding, and clearly annoyed that his time was being wasted. "Honestly," he said as he finished scribbling, "we've tried to get her to chill out, but she always escalates things, complains to the HOA, the city, whoever she thinks will take her side." "Let me guess," I said. "She told you my dog attacked her?" "Yep," said he. "Charged her with intent?" He shook his head. "But I've got a pit too. I know the breed. Most of Mr. Just marshmallows with teeth." I smiled. "Exactly. Tyson wouldn't attack a squirrel unless it insulted his chew toy." We laughed, and just for a moment, the tension melted. Bill tore off a copy of the incident note and handed it to me. "Here's your record. If she tries anything else, you've got paper to back you up." As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Just be careful. People like that don't forget things easily, and if she thinks you embarrassed her, she might try to get revenge in weird ways." I nodded. "Thanks for the heads up." When he left, I locked the door, let out a breath, and looked down at Tyson. "Well, buddy," I said, "we might have just made a new enemy." Tyson thumped his tail once and licked my hand. "But you also made a splash." The next 2 days passed uneventfully, or at least, they appeared to. I went back to work, did my usual chores, watered the garden, and tried to forget about the whole incident. Tyson seemed no worse for wear. He was back to his usual self, lounging under the porch in the early afternoon and barking playfully at squirrels who dared to cross into his domain. For a moment, I actually allowed myself to believe it was over, that maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally absorbed enough embarrassment to leave things alone. I even laughed a little, thinking about her soggy retreat and Tyson's innocent confusion. It had all started to feel like a bizarre fever dream until the morning of the third day. I woke up to the sound of my doorbell. Not the usual single ding-dong, but several in rapid succession, followed by knocking, hard knocking, groggy and confused. I glanced at the clock. 6:13 a.m. My heart jumped. That time of morning meant one of three things. Someone was hurt, someone was in danger, or someone had completely lost their mind. I threw on a hoodie, slipped into my sandals, and headed for the door with Tyson trailing right behind me, ears alert. When I opened it, I saw no one. Just the faint echo of footsteps retreating down the street. But something was there on the doorstep, a manila envelope. No name, no markings, just sealed and slightly damp from the morning dew. I looked up and down the street. Nothing. A few lights on in the distance, but no one nearby. I picked up the envelope cautiously, opened it, and slid out a single sheet of paper. Typed, neatly for it. The heading said, "Notice of Nuisance Dog Behavior Violation," followed by a fake-sounding citation number and a list of witness statements claiming Tyson was aggressive, dangerous, and a risk to neighborhood safety. At the bottom, there was a signature that looked suspiciously like K. Emerson. I didn't know her last name until now, but it didn't take a detective to connect the dots. I sighed, shaking my head. Karen was playing the long game. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. She was trying to build a paper trail, to create the illusion of a pattern, probably hoping that with enough noise, she could get animal control or the city involved. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and reread the letter. It was written on fake letterhead, some nonsense department called the Neighborhood Animal Wellness and Behavior Office. I googled it. No such thing. Karen had actually invented a city department to try and scare me. I couldn't decide if I was more annoyed or impressed. For a few hours, I debated whether to respond at all. Part of me wanted to ignore it clearly, it wasn't official, but the smarter part knew better. If this was the beginning of some weird campaign against Tyson or me, I'd need to be ahead of it. So I did what any reasonable adult in the 21st century would do. I started documenting everything. I printed out the letter, took photos of the envelope, installed a second security camera by the front porch, and even created a folder on my desktop called Karen Files. I knew it sounded ridiculous, but better ridiculous and prepared than surprised and outnumbered. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk Tyson around the neighborhood, partly to clear my head, and partly to show my face. If she was going to try and spin some narrative about me being a menace, I wanted my actual neighbors to see the truth. A man walking his friendly, leashed, well-behaved dog. As I strolled past a few familiar houses, I waved to Mrs. Dawson, who was tending her garden like she did every day. "Beautiful afternoon," I called. She smiled back. "Sure is. That Tyson of yours is such a sweetheart." I thanked her, letting that moment soothe the unease that had settled in my chest all morning. But as we rounded the next block, I caught sight of her. Karen, standing across the street, arms crossed, sunglasses back in place like some kind of daytime vampire. She wasn't walking a dog, wasn't doing anything, really just watching. I met her gaze for a split second before she turned away like I wasn't even worth acknowledging. Tyson didn't bark, didn't growl, just looked at her, then looked back at me, as if to say, her again. We kept walking. Back at the house, I noticed something else. A small pile of pebbles placed in a line just outside my back gate. It was subtle, almost artistic, deliberate, and it hadn't been there yesterday. I crouched down, staring at it. Tyson sniffed it curiously but didn't react. Was it a prank? A signal? Just neighborhood kids? Maybe. Or maybe someone was trying to let me know I was being watched. I swept the stones aside, walked back into the house, and locked the doors. That night, I sat on the back porch with the lights off, just listening. The wind rustled the trees. A car drove by in the distance. Tyson lay at my feet, alert but calm. And in that stillness, I realized something. This wasn't just a battle of property lines or dog breeds. It had turned into something stranger, something personal. Karen had decided I was the villain in her story, and she clearly wasn't done writing the next chapter. The next morning, I decided I needed to do more than just document things. Needed allies. Karen clearly wasn't going to let this go, and if she was planning to escalate it to some kind of community-level smear campaign, I wanted to get ahead of it. So I started talking. Not gossiping, not complaining, just quietly. Casually checking in with my neighbors during walks with Tyson or short afternoon hellos. I figured if Karen was going to drag my name around the neighborhood like a muddy welcome mat, I should at least know who was buying into her drama and who wasn't. To my surprise and, honestly, relief, most people already knew the score. It started with Steve and Julia across the street. They were an older couple, semi-retired, with a pair of toy poodles that looked like little clouds with eyes. When I ran into them during a walk, I casually brought up the situation. Steve chuckled. "Karen?" he said, practically spitting the name out. "She's nuts. Last month she called the city on us because she said our Christmas lights were still up in April." Julia rolled her eyes. They were in the garage window. Inside, not even visible from the street. She just peeked through our fence like some kind of suburban spy. We all laughed, but it hit me that I wasn't alone. That Karen had been quietly tormenting people long before she swam off with one of my pool floats. The more I talked to people, the more stories I heard. Mrs. Dawson, the gardening lady, said Karen once knocked on her door and demanded she cut her lavender bushes because the smell was giving her headaches. Another neighbor, Mike, had merely gotten fined because Karen told animal control his parrot screamed profanity at her, only for the inspector to find out the parrot was actually a recording from a Bluetooth speaker Mike had put on his porch, just to mess with her. One guy had even caught Karen on camera, measuring how far his recycling bins stuck out past the curb on trash day. She was the kind of person who saw HOA rules, not as guidelines, but as personal vendettas waiting to happen. Still, for all the laughter and shared stories, there was an underlying concern in everyone's voice. No one really wanted to poke the bear, even if that bear wore knockoff Ray-Bans and a hat. "She's petty," Steve had said, "but she's persistent. She'll make your life miserable just out of boredom." I believed it. The fake dog citation, the early morning doorbell stunt, the rocks at my gate hit was petty warfare. Quiet, deniable, insidious. She wasn't attacking outright. She was trying to unravel me with 1,000 tiny annoyances. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I started documenting everything. Not just the events, but the neighborhood conversations too. Every time someone told me a Karen story, I asked if I could quote them anonymously if needed. Most of them said yes. A few even offered to speak up publicly if things got worse. And honestly, I was kind of surprised how quickly people rallied around me. I guess it's because while everyone had dealt with Karen, no one had ever stood up to her long enough to draw a line in the sand. The next escalation came 2 nights later, just after dark. I had just finished a late dinner and was out back tossing a ball to Tyson under the floodlights. It was mid-fetch when I heard it. Shrill, unmistakable beep 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 sound, not from my yard, from Karen's. I muted the music on my patio speaker and listened. The sound repeated, then stopped. A few seconds later, beep 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 again. Then a voice. This is a protected perimeter. Please remain off the premises. I froze. Karen had installed a motion-activated speaker system pointed at my fence. She was broadcasting pre-recorded warnings anytime movement happened near her yard. Tyson, completely unaware of the absurdity, dropped the ball and barked in confusion at the robotic voice. This is a protected perimeter. It repeated again, louder this time. I walked over to the fence and looked across. Sure enough, I saw a small gray box mounted on a post in her yard, aimed directly at where Tyson liked to chase fireflies. She had turned her backyard into a one-woman surveillance zone, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. The pettiness of it almost made me laugh, but the real problem wasn't the voice. It was what followed. About 15 minutes later, a white SUV rolled up and parked near her driveway. Out stepped a man in a uniform shirt with community compliance volunteer printed in faded letters. Across the back, he didn't come to my house, just stood in her yard, nodded at something she showed him on a tablet, then walked back to his car. I recognized him. His name was Dennis. He used to do pest control for the HOA before he started calling himself some kind of freelance ordinance enforcer. The sight of Karen and Dennis standing in the dark, huddled over a glowing screen, whispering like it was a military op, rattled me more than I expected. I didn't like being watched or plotted against. And I didn't like that Tyson, the gentlest soul I knew, was being painted as some kind of criminal just because a bitter woman had nothing better to do with her time. So that night, I sat down with my laptop, opened the Karen Files folder, and started writing something new, something I hadn't considered before, a formal letter, not to her, not to the HOA, but to the city, because if she wanted to start a paper trail, I could start one too, and mine would be real. Writing that letter to the city was strangely satisfying. I sat at my desk, fingers flying across the keyboard, laying out the facts with the cold clarity of someone who's had enough. I didn't embellish anything. Didn't need to. The truth was more than enough. I attached screenshots from my security cameras, Karen climbing my gate, lounging in my pool, yelling at my dog. I added a copy of her fake citation letter, and a screenshot of the neighborhood group chat where Julia had casually referred to her as the pool pirate. I even included timestamps, witness summaries, and a link to the fake government department. Karen had cooked up. The tone was professional, but firm. The kind of letter that says, I'm not asking you to solve my problem. I'm alerting you before it becomes yours. I sent it off to 3 different departments: Animal Control, Code Enforcement, and the Neighborhood Mediation Office. Whether or not they did anything right away didn't matter. I was planting a seed on official record, a timestamp in government databases. If Karen kept pushing, I'd already be 3 steps ahead. The next day, I printed a copy and dropped it off at the HOA's tiny office in the strip mall near the gas station. The woman behind the desk, Kathy, looked up at me like I'd just handed her a live grenade. Another complaint about Karen, she asked. You guys should really have your own folder by now. I gave her a tight smile. Oh, we do. This one just has receipts. That night, I slept better than I had in days. Tyson curled up at the foot of the bed like usual, his breathing steady and calm. But in the morning, I woke up to something that made my blood run cold. On my front lawn, staked into the grass with a long nail, was a crudely made wooden sign. Burned into a TS. Burned was the word. Beware. That was it. No explanation, no other vandalism, just the sign, surrounded by a half-circle of pebbles like some kind of suburban curse ritual. I stood there in my robe, staring at it, heart thudding in my chest. The sun was barely up. The street was quiet. And I suddenly felt very, very tired of playing nice. I took pictures, pulled the sign up, saved it in my garage, just in case. Then I checked the cameras. Sure enough, there she was. 4:13 a.m. Karen, wearing all black like she was about to rob a museum. She crept onto my lawn, drove the stake into the ground, arranged the pebbles like some kind of lawn art project, and slipped back into the shadows. It was all so calculated, so childishly theatrical, it almost felt like satire, except it wasn't funny anymore. Not when it crossed into veiled Thria, TS, not when it was happening under the cover of darkness. I uploaded the footage, saved it to a backup drive, and forwarded the file to the same departments I'd emailed earlier. Subject line: new incident, harassment, escalation, evidence, attached. I didn't care if I sounded paranoid anymore. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her play the victim when the consequences of her games finally caught up with her. Around noon, my doorbell rang. This time it wasn't a volunteer in a faded shirt or a clipboard warrior. It was a real officer. Officer Daniels, mid-30s. Unreadable. Polite in the way that makes you unsure if he's on your side or preparing to cuff you. I let him in, offered him coffee, and showed him everything: the videos, the letter, the sign, even the burned edges. He took notes, nodded quietly, and eventually said, "You've got a pretty solid case here. Honestly, most of the time these things stay verbal. but she's left a physical threat on your property. That puts this in a different category. He explained that while the sign alone wasn't legally threatening, the pattern of behavior, trespassing, impersonation of a public official, and harassment could support a restraining order, or, at the very least, a formal warning. We're not talking jail time, he said, but we are talking paperwork, fines, and a visit from a uniformed officer. That tends to scare these types straight. I nodded. Do it. I'm tired of waiting for her to get bored. Tyson, lying nearby, let out a low, sleepy woof. Like even he was fed up with the drama. As Officer Daniels left, I caught a glimpse of Karen standing in her upstairs window, watching through slatted blinds. I didn't wave, I didn't nod. I just looked back. We locked eyes for half a second. Hers were cold, calculating, but I could tell something had changed. She wasn't grinning this time. She wasn't smug. She looked rattled. And for the first time since she'd backstroked into my life, I felt like I was the one holding the upper hand. That night, the air felt different, quieter, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Tyson and I sat on the back porch, again, just like we always did, but this time, I wasn't waiting. I was ready. The next morning started off quiet, too quiet. No motion alarms, no ominous wooden signs, no barking dogs, no creepy figures pacing along fences. Just the distant hum of lawnmowers, and the occasional chirp of birds darting through the hedges. Even Tyson seemed unusually relaxed, stretched out on his back in the sun with his tongue lolling out like he'd finally achieved doggy nirvana. Still, I wasn't letting my guard down, not after everything. Karen had gone silent, but it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like the moment in a horror movie where the monster disappears from the radar right before it crashes through a window. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she was planning. Around 11:45 a.m., just as I was about to make lunch, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike the parrot guy. Bro, come outside. You're gonna want to see this. I stepped out onto the porch and immediately saw what he meant. Karen's backyard, normally pristine with its creepy lawn gnome and overwatered hedges, was a full-on circus. A city code enforcement vehicle was parked in front of her house, and two uniformed officers were speaking to her in the yard. One of them was holding a stack of printouts that looked suspiciously like the files I'd submitted. The other had a body cam flashing red dot. Karen, for once, was not in control. Her arms were waving, her voice shrill even from half a block away. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like fabricated evidence, and that dog's a menace, and oddly, community stalking ring, which sounded like the title of the worst reality show ever pitched. She looked frantic, red-faced, desperate. The same woman who strutted around like the queen of the cul-de-sac now stood there trying to convince two bored-looking government employees that the entire neighborhood was conspiring against her, failing miserably. Few more neighbors came out to watch. Steve and Julia, across the street, stood in their doorway sipping lemonade, like they'd paid for front-row seats. Mrs. Dawson peeked over her rose bushes. Even Bill, the HOA volunteer, was walking his poodles down the sidewalk slower than usual, clearly taking it all in. I leaned casually against my porch post, arms crossed. I wasn't smug, not exactly, but I wasn't hiding my satisfaction either. Eventually, one of the officers turned toward my house, spotted me, and gave a short wave. I returned it with a nod. The other one turned to Karen and pointed at something in the report, probably the part about impersonating a government agency, and her expression dropped like someone had unplugged her personality. She looked pale now, not angry, not dramatic, just exposed. The sound of her voice dropped to a murmur, and she slowly retreated into her house, leaving the two officers to fill out forms on their hood. Mike walked over and clapped me on the shoulder. You did it, he said with a grin. The Karen Slayer himself. I laughed. Took long enough. She's toast, he added. Apparently the fake department thing is actually a felony if she sent it through the mail. Could be mail fraud, that's like federal. I blinked. I hadn't even considered that. I was just trying to get her to stop stalking my pool like it was a resort brochure. Later that evening, I got a call from Officer Daniels. He gave me the full update. Karen had received a formal citation for trespassing, a cease and desist warning for harassment, and was officially under review for potential municipal violations. She wouldn't be arrested at, but if anything else happened, they were ready to escalate. I thanked him, hung up, and sat quietly for a while. Tyson climbed onto the porch beside me, resting his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears and whispered, "We might finally get our peace back, buddy." Over the next week, something strange happened. Nothing. No doorbell pranks. No surveillance recordings. No burnt signs. Karen's blinds stayed closed. And for the first time since I'd moved in, her yard was silent. No more fake announcements. No more late-night plotting. Just the hum of normal suburban life returning to its natural balance. It was like she had vanished, and in a way, she had, not physically, but socially. Nobody waved at her anymore. Her porch was empty. The neighborhood, in its quiet, passive-aggressive way, had collectively decided to exile her in plain sight. One Saturday afternoon, as I was grilling on the patio, Julia strolled over with a tray of cookies. "Peace offering," she said. "From the neighborhood to you and Tyson." I raised an eyebrow. I didn't know we were at war. she smirked. Let's just say you won a very long, very stupid battle on behalf of us all. Tyson barked once in approval and immediately tried to steal a cookie. As the sun set and laughter echoed from a few houses over. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at my yard, my peaceful, empty, quiet yard. The pool sparkled under the glow of the patio lights. Tyson lay belly up, dreaming of tennis balls and flying squirrels. And me. I finally had the one thing that Karen, for all her scheming and drama, couldn't take from me: my peace, not my pool, not my dog, not home. And if she ever tried again, well, Tyson still had his favorite float waiting.